You know how tech founders always have some fairy tale about the magical moment that inspired their company? Well, according to Uber's founders, they were in Paris one evening. It was snowing and they couldn't find a cab. So, in a flash of brilliance, they asked themselves, what if you could just tap your phone and a car comes to you? And that's how Uber was born. Well, it's a complete lie. Everything at that time was being turned into an app on our phones. Hailing a cab was no exception. Uber didn't invent this. There were multiple competitors already doing it. Lyft was actually the one who pioneered the ride-sharing model we know today, after its founder saw how carpools were organized during a trip to Zimbabwe. And that product was gaining traction, so Uber launched UberX afterward as a copy of Lyft. But today, most people think Lyft was the copycat. And I'm not saying Lyft is some perfectly innocent company, but Uber pulled ahead simply because of how much more willing it was to ignore safety standards and step on others. Uber's strategy was to move into cities so fast, get drivers dependent on it for income, and get riders accustomed to the convenience that regulators couldn't keep up. Because by the time they noticed, Uber was so embedded in people's daily lives that regulators had to accommodate Uber rather than the other way around. Well, a lot of libertarians in Silicon Valley praise this as proof that speed and hustle can force slow regulators to catch up with innovation. But the problem with this approach is that you're putting guys who were barely even checked for valid driver's licenses, some of whom were convicted violent criminals, and pairing them with young women who assumed this was a safe app because it was so big and mainstream. So surely it must be regulated to some extent. And that young woman was now alone in his car. Well, what did we expect was going to happen? This resulted in over 400,000 reports of sexual misconduct across 6 years. But it's not like this caught anyone off guard. Uber's executives weren't stupid. They understood that they were creating the exact conditions for this to happen. They went ahead anyway because things like running thorough background checks and working with regulators would slow them down and cost too much. They knowingly put women at risk and had them pay the price for Uber's growth. Because it was cheaper to settle a handful of lawsuits from the few women who did speak up than it was to slow down and prevent those situations in the first place. Well, horror stories about this started going viral, and that threatened Uber's bottom line. So if you were an Uber executive, what would you do? Address the problem? How about threatening the journalists who were reporting on those stories? Because that's what a senior executive actually suggested. Seems like Uber is doing fine regardless of all of this, but that means competitors will try to beat you with better algorithms or service. So what would you do? Compete on quality? How about having your employees make fake accounts on rival rideshare apps, book rides on them, and then cancel, to waste the driver's time and frustrate them enough to leave that app and join Uber? Want to grow Uber One subscriptions? Just enroll some customers without their permission, and then when they try to cancel, make the process as painful and confusing as possible, by forcing them to go through 23 screens and 32 actions just to unsubscribe. If I went through every terrible thing Uber has done, this video would be an hour long. But the point is, all of this is Uber's real innovation, not getting a cab on your phone.